For everyone who is here now, my name is Megan Simons. I am a clerk at the library. I work a lot with Morgan, who is the Teen Services Librarian. And this is our session 2 for the Teen Mental Health series. Our presenter, his name is Chris Guzniczak. He is a licensed professional counselor at the Flower Mound Counseling. He helps young and not so young adults and teenagers effectively manage depression, anger, unhealthy addictions, and relationship challenges. Chris also runs outpatient groups for adults and adolescents at Carrollton Springs Behavioral Hospital and Changes Outpatient Treatment Centers. Chris followed his passion to help people as a therapist after 20 years of successful technology sales, management, and training. And today he will be teaching us the session on how to manage our emotions. For those of you who have any questions, you could send them into the Q&A or the chat. I will be monitoring those. And at the end of the session tonight, I will ask Chris the questions that you presented to us. So whenever you're ready, Chris, you could take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody. I am really excited to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation. And then I'll, oops. Let me share my screen real fast. Then I'll switch over to the presentation. As Megan mentioned, my name is Chris. I'm at Flower Mound Counseling and been doing this for a couple of years. I love it and I really enjoy the teaching aspect as well, which is why I really enjoy doing this. As she mentioned, I was doing a lot of training my last few years before making the career change into counseling. So anyway, really happy to be here and thanks for being here. I know everyone's busy and everyone's probably sick of Zoom calls. So it means a lot to us. So we're talking about teen mental health, and this is part 2. And if you missed part 1, you haven't watched it yet, it's okay. It does follow on to part 1, but it is kind of a separate topic, so you can always go back. It's not too bad. Here's kind of an overview of the 3 sessions. Last week, we talked about understanding our emotions, and the best kind of way I can, just a quick explanation of what we talked about, think about it this way. People come to see me because you're struggling with anxiety or depression or anger. You're in pain emotionally, right? And what I always like to work with people on is, instead of just trying to fix it, like if you go to a medical doctor, they're going to try and fix it with medicine or something like that, and try and make the emotion go away, basically, so you don't feel it anymore. I take a different approach, and I really try to help you see what those emotions are telling you about yourself. And almost every single time, it's actually pointing to really amazing positive things about things that are important to you. So you're feeling, depression or anxious about maybe a situation in your life where you don't have relationships that are important to you, or things like that. So we really kind of shifted the conversation on those negative emotions to talk about what they mean and what they're saying about you at this time in your life. And as we look at those emotions, we start to see what we call some of the emotion is caused by things that are happening around us, and some of it's caused by our own thoughts and the way that we see the world and we see ourselves and so forth. And that's what we're going to focus on this week. We're going to say, okay, so when there are these distortions, or this way that I twist the truth in my own head and the way I think about things, what can I do about that? So that's really what we're going to talk about today, because what we find is we can make a change in the way that we think. So I do have to say, once again, as we kick off here, it's a presentation that's for informational purposes. It's not intended to be advice or counseling. And if you do feel like you need counseling services, please, reach out to a therapist. You can email me if you like, or find someone that you work with and kind of, do more one-on-one. But from a privacy perspective, this presentation is really, it's just for information, okay? So I will share one slide that we had last week, just because it's important to this topic, and then we'll kind of kick off the new stuff. So once again, remember, your truth is your truth. And what I mean by that is We all have our own perspective on everything that happens to us, right? And this number one says, you know, we feel the way that we think. And once again, that's kind of what I just said, where the situation around you, whether it's a pandemic or, you know, not being able to go to school, not being able to spend time with friends, you know, all of these things happening around us, they impact how we feel, but they don't directly cause the way we feel. We feel based on thoughts that we have in our head. It's how we perceive everything around us. A simple example might be, let's say you go to class and the teacher gives a pop quiz. So you've got, you know, say 20 kids in a classroom that have the exact same experience happen, but they all experience it slightly differently. They all kind of receive it differently. Some of them might be really freaked out and scared. Other students might be really nervous. Other ones might be kind of excited. Other ones just may not even faze them. And so it's proof that even though they all experience the exact same thing, they've received it differently based on their own kind of where they are in their lives right now. You know, it's those thoughts in your head, like things like, oh, I got this. I already know this stuff. This is going to be easy. Or another thought might be, oh my gosh, I don't know this. This is going to be so hard. Or, you know, those thoughts telling me that I'm smart or that I'm not smart. Or some of those thoughts might be things like, oh my gosh, I really need this grade. So there's a ton of pressure on me. Or somebody else might think, oh, this is awesome. I need this really bad. You know, so there's so many different thoughts that are going in your head that literally drive the way you feel. And that really leads into the second point, which is sometimes those negative thoughts, they're not true. Okay, they're based on things that maybe we've learned and we've kind of twisted that truth on ourselves. And we're going to talk about a number of different ways that we do that tonight. Okay, so the fact that we do distort that truth sometimes, and then kind of the third point here is that if you can adjust and challenge some of those thoughts that aren't necessarily true, you can literally change the way you feel. So, you know, in our example, if I get a pop quiz and my first thought is, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail this, so I'm really nervous. If I can, you know, in that moment, challenge that thought and remind myself, wait a minute, I actually know this stuff really well. I've never, you know, I haven't failed any quizzes, and kind of remind myself of all those things that can disprove that thought. I won't be nervous anymore because there's no reason to be nervous anymore. There's nothing there making me nervous. So that's kind of what this is all about. So there's really, you know, there's a few steps to this, and I'll tell you that you don't have to, you know, feverishly write all this stuff down. I think these decks are available to you, and this is really just kind of a summary of the steps. We're going to go through them step by step as we go. I just want to kind of get us kicked off here with the summary. I do also want to mention real fast that I am going to use a worksheet that's called a daily mood log. If you were signed up for this class, I think a couple of hours ago, you would have seen a link that would take you to my website where you can go in and print it off if you want. If you haven't done that, I've done this plenty of times with clients of mine where we just grab a piece of paper and kind of write it out as well. So whichever works best for you, but it's always available out there as a tool for you. But we're gonna kind of get to that here in a moment. So if you think about some steps to kind of changing the way that I think about things, that first step is being aware of the negative feeling. And that's a lot of kind of what we did last week. It's learning how to really understand how I'm feeling and recognize when, okay, you know what, something's not right here. I'm really stuck in this. It's impacting school, it's impacting friendships, it's impacting work or something like that, okay? So kind of being aware of that and being willing to really explore how you're feeling. The second part is identifying, okay, what am I thinking about while I'm feeling this way, as specifically as I can kind of capture that. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why it's important to literally write those thoughts down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look for those distortions in those thoughts. And that's what's great about this tool that I'm going to share, is because it gives you a chance to do all of these things on one piece of paper. And then number 5 is kind of learning some different ways to challenge those negative thoughts and those distortions. And then the last step is really to see if you can after you've challenged those distortions, see if you can kind of reframe that thought, and maybe basically change your own truth is really what you're trying to do. And what you'll find is if you believe your new truth, the old truth becomes almost ridiculous, and you wonder why you believed it in the first place. So we're going to get started. As I mentioned before, the tool is called the Daily Mood Log, and I do want to say that it was developed by a Dr. David Burns out of California. He's got the Feeling Good Institute, and I would say if this kind of stuff interests you, he has a lot of amazing resources. I mean, like more than you could imagine. He's got probably 12, 15 books on a number of different topics around mental health. He's got a podcast and all kinds of resources and things like that. So for therapists and for clients and for people that just are interested in mental health, I guess. So it's really good stuff. But so we're going to talk about the Daily Mood Log. And what you'll notice right away, and I'm just going to take you through kind of step by step here, and we'll use an example as we go through this. So you see that it starts with a situation or an event. And I'll tell you why that's important, because if you're feeling a lot of, say you're feeling a lot of depression, and it just feels like this cloud is over you, and it just feels real general, and you don't want to do anything, you're not motivated, you don't even want to get out of bed. It's hard to do anything with that because you don't know where to begin, right? And it's hard for a therapist to do anything with that as well. I can't fix depression. What I can do is help you think about a very specific moment when you were depressed. And that's what we're going to do. So we try to get as specific as possible. So what we're going to use in this case, we're going to say as our example that, let's say I am, I'm at home. It's, in the evening when I'm done with school, I'm done with homework, and everything's kind of settling down. And a lot of times that's the worst time for somebody who's struggling with, depression or anxiety, because we start getting in our own head at that time, right? So we're going to just say for this scenario, I'm at home, kind of alone, and I'm starting to get in my head and feel real down about things. Okay, so that's kind of the scenario. And the next thing I do, so I write that up top, and then I start going through the emotions, and this is really important. I circle all of the emotions that I'm feeling. And that's really important because, as I just mentioned, my first thought is I'm feeling down, I'm feeling maybe depressed and sad, and I could just stay there. But if I start kind of looking through this and just ask myself, like, do I feel worried or nervous or anxious? No. Do I feel guilty or ashamed? No. Inferior, inadequate? No, maybe I feel a little bit of that. I may get to like lonely and like, oh, I feel really lonely now that I'm kind of thinking about it. So I'll circle that and kind of just go all the way through the list and see if you can really identify everything that you feel, okay? And as you do that, you circle the ones that you're feeling, and then you come back and you give them a percentage from 1 to 100 on how strong is this feeling, right? So if I look back at this scenario and I say, okay, so that sadness is really strong. I feel really, really down right now. I might put 100% there. I do feel some shame and some guilt, but it's not as strong as the sadness. So maybe it's more like a 60. And then that loneliness was really kind of a surprise that snuck up on me, and it's really heavy. So I'm going to put 100% there. So that's just kind of the process. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just helping you. It's just all about kind of understanding those emotions, those feelings. Okay. So that's the first kind of big step is how am I feeling right now? So I've captured that, and it's a really important step. The second step is, okay, so I know I feel this way. What do I think? What am I thinking about right now? What are those thoughts that have me feeling down or sad? And in this scenario, I'm thinking about this and I'm saying, you know what? I don't feel like people like me. Like I don't feel likable. Maybe I haven't been as connected with my friends lately. I'm not really hearing from them. I'm just feeling really down on myself. So I start writing these thoughts down that are kind of in my head as specifically as I can. And if it's And here, so actually I've got a couple of examples. So, oh, I'm sorry, I actually skipped the part. I skipped a point. So, well, before I go to that, before I go to the thoughts, I'm sorry, I'll take a quick step back. What I did here was on the percent. Oh, you know what? So this is an older mood log. I'm not sure what the one has that you might see on the website. What I meant to do was use a column in here that says percentage goal and not after. That's kind of what I was thinking about when I did this, but I just realized it says after. But the newer version of the mood log has a column for percentage goal, and that's what is my goal at the end of this. So you can see, you might say, well, duh, obviously it would be 0% for everything. I don't want to feel these things. Well, if you watched the session last week, you learned that there's actually value in our bad feelings, right? There's value in those negative feelings. So a lot of times we don't necessarily want to give it all up. Maybe I do want to feel a little bit guilt because it kind of helps me doing the right things. I just don't want it to be like taking over my day and my happiness, if you will. So that's what that 10% is. If I just decided that I wanted to kind of hang on to, a little bit of those feelings, it would be okay if I don't get them down to 0. So sorry about that. Okay, so here we are. So this is, this first thought was I'm unlikable. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, no one at school even likes me. I feel like I should be funnier. I should be more interesting. I should be kind of better at, making people interested in me, maybe a better conversationalist. And the other thing is, it's just, my friends are so smart. I'm in the smart classes, and I don't feel like I'll ever be as smart as them. I know they kind of look down at me and whatnot. So as I got all these thoughts just like flying through my head, I'm trying to copy them down as specifically as I can into this worksheet. Okay. There's a couple of, what I'll say is sometimes you might think, I can just do this in my head, but I promise you this is much more effective if you get into the habit of writing them down, at least for a while. And there's a couple of really specific reasons for that. One, it makes it more real, when you write it down and you like look at it. It's almost like you're looking at it like somebody else wrote it and you're looking at it and you're like, oh my gosh, wow, that's what I'm thinking. When it's in my head, I kind of go around in circles a lot of the time. The other thing you're doing is you're literally tying in two sides of your brain when you write something down instead of just thinking about it. So it's a better way to kind of get focused and zeroed in on what you have there. It's kind of like, I know I've heard something you guys might be experiencing right now is now that you've got online classes and maybe you're not able to have paper and pen and write things out while you're working through it. And I've heard some students really struggling with that because it's part of how we learn. And I think switching to an online on a laptop or something like that, it can make it harder to learn because you're not pulling in that part of your brain. And a lot of us needs that, I think, to learn. So that's kind of what we're talking about here, which is why it does help to literally write them down. Okay, so I've written down a few negative thoughts. And then once again, I do this again and I say, well, how much do I believe this thought right now? So I did the same thing. Like I believe it's 100%. This one I believe, but I kind of talked myself out. So I put 50, I put 180, and it's just, once again, just giving me a sense for how strong these thoughts are at this point. So what we've done so far is we understand how we feel. We now have some culprits, if you will. We have some negative thoughts that are making us feel that way. The next thing we want to do is take a look at those thoughts and see if we can find distortions. And once again, distortions it's a fancy word for like ways that I twist the truth on myself. Okay. If you have this mood log, if you printed it out or you're looking at it online, it's 2 pages of front and back. And when you look on the back, you actually see a list of the distortions. But I'm gonna kind of talk through them here with you so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, I will tell you that at some point in our lives, we all do all of these things in our own heads. The problem is when I'm really starting to believe some of this and it's really impacting me negatively and making me feel bad. You'll probably see that, oh yeah, I do all that stuff, but there's probably a couple that really, really get to you, okay? So here's what they are. So the first one is all or nothing thinking. And this is, it's looking at things in like black and white. Either either I get a perfect score in this class or I'm a failure. Either my friends love me or they hate me. It's like putting things in absolutes, like either you're my friend or you're not my friend. And the problem is that's just not the way things work in the real world. Nothing is perfect and nothing is absolutely the worst it can be. Everything is somewhere in between. But we get into our head and start using words like never, like I never do well, I never do that. Or she always does that, he always does that. We get those in our head and it just makes us feel like that much worse, right? Overgeneralization is when you see an event and you think of it as like a never-ending pattern of defeat. It's one of those things where maybe I've experienced something a few times. Like let's say I've had a couple of Spanish classes, and my first two classes, my teacher just I couldn't understand my teacher, and the teacher just didn't like me for whatever reason. At least I didn't think so. So I'm going into Spanish for the third time, and I automatically think, oh, this is going to be terrible. The teacher's not going to like me, even though it's a completely different person, because it's like I feel like it's like a pattern, like it always happens to me. Okay. Mental filter is one that's really heavy with depression. It's pretty much always present when we're feeling depressed. And mental filter is when we just completely dwell on the negatives and ignore the positives in a situation. It's kind of like, and I can't even see the good things maybe in a relationship or something like that. It's like my friend didn't text me back and I'm automatically thinking, oh my gosh, this is terrible because they didn't text me back and they didn't like this and I didn't hear from them today. And all I can think of is, oh my gosh, and I remember last week we were arguing about something. All you can think about is the bad, the negatives. And you start thinking, oh, they hate me. And you're not even like pausing to remember, oh, of course we did, we did play on Xbox 2 nights ago and they seem fine. And, oh, and they did say they were going to be really busy today. It's like we just forget all these other details. All we can focus on is the negatives. Discounting the positives is similar, but it's actually kind of going a step beyond and thinking, well, I do recognize a positive, but I just don't think it matters. So it could be, I don't think I'm good at algebra. I just think I'm dumb when it comes to algebra. And, oh, I got an A in that class. Okay, I recognize that's good, but it doesn't really matter. I must have just gotten lucky. I still feel bad about myself. So it's kind of that kind of thinking. Jumping to conclusions really comes hand in hand with anxiety. And mind reading is when you assume that people are reacting negative to you. So very heavy when you're dealing in, think of like kind of social anxieties, being very shy, being worried how people are thinking about me, noticing me, judging me, things like that. A lot of mind reading in that. If you're getting up to talk in front of a class and you're really, really stressed out about what people are noticing and thinking about you and things like that. So that's mind reading. Fortune telling is when you just assume that you just know that something is going to end really, really badly. You just know it in your heart, and you can't. You can literally like see it, like failure or something like that in the future. Magnification, minimization, which is really just kind of blowing things out of proportion or shrinking them. Emotional reasoning is when you have this thought in your head like, oh, I feel this way, and then you just start to believe it. Like, oh, I feel so hopeless, so there must not be any hope. I feel like an idiot, so I must be one. That kind of thinking. The last three are kind of connected quite a bit with like looking inwardly and blaming ourselves. So should statements is kind of criticizing yourself or other people with like shoulds or musts or oughts, have tos. And when you think about should statements, the problem is what should statements are literally doing is it's literally putting judgment on a situation, right? And there's no value in it. So it's beating myself up or beating other people up. And the problem is with myself, it just makes me feel guilty and inferior. with others, it gets us kind of frustrated and angry with other people when they don't do what we think they should do. Um, you'll you'll find that in almost all of these negative thoughts, there's either a should statement or there's what we call a hidden should. And what that means is it's like, maybe it's not worded, but deep down it's like, yeah, and I feel like I should have done this. I should be better at that. I shouldn't have done this. Those types of things that we do to ourselves all the time. Labeling is, it's one of those things that we label ourselves a lot of times in our own heads, and it just makes us feel so much worse than we need to. And it's always like this general statement that rarely even has a lot of meaning behind it, but just because it's in our head, we start believing it. You know, if I start thinking, oh, I just failed a test, I'm stupid. Well, failing a test doesn't make you stupid. Failing a test literally just means you failed a test. It could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe I didn't study a lot for it. I wasn't prepared for it. Maybe it was a really hard test. Maybe I'm not particularly good at that topic, but none of those things point to me being an unintelligent person, because there's so much more to intelligence and being smart or whatnot. But we label ourselves and we start believing it. Sometimes we hear other people use labels with us and we believe them as well. So we're actually going to talk about that one a little bit here in a minute around what you do about it. And then self-blame and other blame, that's, you know, blaming myself completely, maybe for situations where I don't even necessarily have control over all of it. You know, I may blame myself for being, I'll use a silly example, for being short, right? I'll literally say, oh my gosh, I'm so short. And I'm blaming myself for it, like I could control how tall I am. But we do things like that all the time. So kind of being aware of that. And then we do the same thing towards others as well. So, okay, so that was a mouthful, but that's kind of the cognitive distortions. And as we go into, so what the heck do we do with all these? What you'll find is there are a lot of different, I'll say methods to challenge them. And sometimes I think you'll be able to just kind of do this on your own and, you know, help yourself see where you're kind of beaten up by yourself and feel better and understand it. There's other times where it's going to be a lot harder. And there are definitely, you know, times when you probably do need help of like a therapist or someone to kind of work through some of the tougher ones. There are times when these distortions, where you may find a situation where you do a lot of self-blame and a lot of these should statements, and you might kind of get to like a really core belief and feel like you're just not good enough, something really heavy. Sometimes those are the times where you really need to take a step back and you get a little bit of help and get through that specifically and still have these tools. So once you get through kind of that, you know, really hard, you know, part in all of this and you're healing, then you can kind of move forward with the tools again. So I would say these are very effective tools, but they're not foolproof. There's you know, a lot of different ways to kind of work through your issues. So, okay, so we're just gonna look at that first thought for our example this evening. And it was, I am unlikable. So we're gonna say, okay, so we've got our thought. Now, what are some distortions we can find? Well, right off the bat, I'm like, unlikable. That sounds like a label, right? That is it's just kind of it's a general term. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I'm slapping on myself right now and I'm beating myself up for it, all right? So what do I do with that? Well, one of the methods to challenge labeling that might be effective in this case is called defining the terms. So I'm gonna look at this and say, okay, I'm calling myself unlikable. What is unlikable? What does that even mean? How do you like and not like someone else? Because you know, what I'm telling myself is I'm not funny, I'm not interesting, and all these things. But in reality, think about the people that you like, that you spend time with. What is that kind of common denominator? Generally, it's like having common interests, right? I like being around people that like the same kind of things that I do. And that has nothing to do with how funny or smart or anything like that as I am. If I'm someone who really enjoys, you know, say science fiction, for example, if I'm hanging around a bunch of people that love science fiction, it's fun, it's enjoyable. If I'm someone that just loves animals, I might go spend more time someplace where there's a lot of animals, you know, and just really enjoy that. So I started thinking about likability, and you can start kind of challenging what that even means, right? So that's one of the kind of methods to it. And as you do that, you're already kind of starting to challenge, I am unlikable. Like, does this even make sense? Okay. So then I'm like, okay, so what else is it? Well, I think it's all or nothing thinking, because I'm saying like either I'm unlikable or I'm likable, and that's it. And there's no in between, right? And the truth is, there's a method called kind of shades of gray. So this is black and white thinking, and one of the things that helps is to try and think of more what's called shades of gray. So think of, okay, so what is like the perfect likable person? Can I like put a name or a face on that? Who is that? And who is like the least likable person I could possibly imagine? Now, where am I? I'm somewhere in between. And the truth is, that is me. I am somewhere in between. And it depends a lot on the first one, which we talked about with, who I have interests with. Because the other thing is I'm going to be likable with some people and maybe unlikable with other people. And that's okay. That's kind of how it works. I mean, that's how all of us work. So this is kind of this concept of challenging the fact that it's either likable or unlikable. So what I hope that you can kind of see what we're doing is all we're doing with these distortions is we're finding kind of different ways to think about this thought in my mind. We're kind of challenging it from different angles almost. There's a lot of similarities, but it just kind of gives us different angles to think about them and challenge them. So I think there's emotional reasoning in this. It's like, and I think it's because like I feel this way. Like I feel unlikable, so I'm starting to believe it. So what does that even mean? And what do I do with that? Well, think about it this way. In a lot of ways, if I kind of really pause and think about this, I think maybe the fact that I feel kind of depressed and sad might be leading this thought and kind of creating almost like this circle. And so how do I challenge that? Well, think about it this way. There's an interesting little method that I like to use that actually is used a lot in self-blame. And you can kind of see some self-blame in this as well. It's like I'm blaming myself for this. What I would do is like I would just like draw a circle and make like a pie chart and try to list all of the other factors that are going into this, and especially factors that I have no control over. So if I'm thinking about this, and what else is kind of leading me to feel this way and causing me to be sad? Well, in this case, it's like, well, we are in the middle of a pandemic that's been going on for a few months. I'm really not seeing my friends very often. We used to love going to the movies maybe, and we haven't done that in like 6 months. They might feel the same. So maybe they're feeling some sadness, and that's impacting how often I'm hearing from them. But these are all things that I don't have necessarily control over, and they have nothing to do with how much my friends like me. So I'm kind of, once again, I'm picking at this word, and I'm really challenging the truth in this statement. So the last one that we'll kind of hit on with this is mental filter. And if you recall, mental filter is about only focusing on the negatives. So one of the ways to challenge this is it's a technique called examining the evidence. And you can kind of be like, well, first of all, can I challenge this? Can I think of people that definitely do like me and have over the last couple of years? And I might think of a couple of friends have spent a lot of time with me, so I know they like me. What are the things that are likable about me? Well, I might think of some of my interest areas and types of movies and things I like to do and stuff that are really likable. And then, is there evidence that either I'm liked or unliked? And what you can do is you can draw out, almost think of it as like drawing out a T. So you like a capital T on a piece of paper. And on one side above the line, you write like evidence for, and the other side, you might write evidence against, like for and against, and see if you can literally like say, okay, here's the evidence that I am unlikable. Well, I haven't heard from my friends in a while, and they didn't respond to my texts, and I haven't done this, or they haven't done this. And then what is the evidence that they do? I am liked. Well, we've been friends for a long time. and we used to do this a lot together. And you can kind of go through that way, and just kind of, it's just helping you kind of think through this in a little more detail instead of just kind of getting stuck in your own head. Okay. So once you've kind of done all this, you can kind of come back and think, okay, so what do I do on my daily mood log? I've now identified these distortions, and what I'll do is I'll write the distortions in the box, and then I'll start thinking, so what do I really believe after looking at these distortions? So I might say, okay, so I've written an L for labeling, all or nothing, emotional reasoning, and mental filter. So I've got those 4 distortions. And then I'm like, okay, so what do I believe? Well, I mean, as I was thinking about this in the interest areas, I'm definitely unique. I know that. And, you know, and I've definitely met people with the same interests that I have, and I think they really like me. And I can look at that and say, okay, do I believe that? How much do I believe that? And after all this, let's say for our example, I say, I completely believe that. I can now see some of my friends definitely like me, so 100%. So when I do, then I look back at the first thought and I say, okay, how much do I believe that I'm unlikable right now? And in this case, we'll just say, okay, let's say I just don't believe that anymore. I would change that to 100. And that's a great way to kind of take a chink out of that negative thought. There are times, of course, when you're still going to believe, you know, some of it, or believe it maybe somewhat heavy. You might look and say, well, is this really maybe the only thought that's making me feel this way? Or maybe you have to look back at the positive thought or the reframed thought and say, well, does this really disprove the other one? Do I really believe it? So it might take kind of some extra work. But that's kind of the process. And what you'll find, like in this case, that first one is going to be the hardest one. As you start going through the other ones, after going through this once and kind of knocking down one thought, they'll actually get a lot easier because a lot of it's going to be overlapped. So, okay. So that's how you use the mood log. It's like I said, it's a powerful tool. You know, it's not the end all be all. There are going to be situations where you're really struggling with it and you do need help. I completely understand that, but it can really be helpful just in ways to kind of challenge some of those thoughts that really come from within. And that's really a great kind of step into feeling better. So with that, Megan, I'm going to go ahead and kind of conclude the presentation portion. Happy to answer questions if they have any, and kind of go from there.
All right. So we haven't gotten any questions yet, but I do have a question for you.
Okay.
And this kind of ties in probably both this week and last week's sessions.
Sure.
How do you know when your negative feelings are having a positive effect or a toxic effect on you?
So it's a really good question, and I talk to clients about it a lot. It's not always obvious, and frankly, sometimes it's really hard to see when you're in it. I will tell you the best way is listen to the people that are close to you. Because if, you know, mom is saying something's wrong and then your best friend is saying, you know, you're not being yourself, and you have a couple of people telling you something's off, that tells you that something's probably off. And you should try to, you know, trust the people that are around you. But it's really, you know, it's really about when it's starting to, you know, when it's impacting other parts of my life negatively. If nothing else, it's worth kind of exploring and thinking, you know, is my negative thought, so actually, and here's a good example as well. Can I go back? Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay, so let's do this as an example. Let's say my thought was, like this number 4, it says, I will never be as smart as my friends. Let's say the thing that that thought is that I'm not as smart as my friends. The thing is, or let's say even more specifically, like I'm not as smart as my friend Caleb. It may be a true statement that I'm just sad about, that, you know, I'm bummed because I'm not as smart as him. If it's a true statement and there's no distortion in that, then maybe it's just something that, you know what, I'm kind of bummed about it. Um, but when you start seeing distortions in that thought, and you see words like, I will never be as smart, there's distortions in that. Or, you know, as my friends is kind of this general term, like I'm not smart as any of them. So there's a difference between like just a statement of truth, and when I kind of start challenging them and I see that I'm making myself guilty, I'm blaming myself, or I'm thinking it's never going to get any better, or I'm focusing only on the bad parts of, you know, things like that. So it's a really good question. You may have a thought in here and challenge it and be like, you know what, there's actually no distortions. I'm just kind of sad about this right now.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. And we do have another question from one of the attendees. It says, what if I can't find any positives for finding evidence?
What if I can't find any positives for finding evidence? So that's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment. It's hard to answer a question like that without a specific something in mind. Let me look at what we had before. So I would say there could be a scenario when, once again, I'm just stating a fact. Like I might be thinking, let's say, you know, I might be thinking, I'm really sad that I can't spend any time with my friends because of this pandemic. The truth is it's a statement, and I am thinking about the negatives. Could I potentially find some positives and other ways to connect with my friends? Yes, but there's really not a whole lot of distortion in that, because it's a legitimate feeling that I do really feel sad about that. If it's something like I'm beating myself up with a label, whether it's I'm unlikable, I'm stupid, I should be ashamed of this, anything like that, I promise you there are distortions and there are positives. And if you're not finding them, I would say get some help, because you can have somebody kind of help you. I mean, there's another method, and another method would be to pull, kind of examine the evidence by polling other people that are close to you. So if you're this, you know, say you're this teenager in this example, and you can't think of anything likable about yourself, ask a couple of your friends, right? Say, hey, you know, am I completely unlikable? What do you like about me? You might be amazed at what you hear from other people that are close to you.
That's a really good answer. So we haven't had any more questions so far. So if there aren't any other, oh, we've got a hand raised. And never mind. Gabriella, did you still want to ask your question? If you want, you could go ahead and put that in the chat. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and wind us down. So for those of you who, again, missed last week's session, it is up on our YouTube channel. It is under the YouTube channel, City of Coppell, and you could find our YouTube video there. We have also posted last week's session on our Facebook page, the Cosby Library and Community Commons Facebook page. Today's session will also be on YouTube within the next week or so. If you have any more questions for Chris that you aren't comfortable asking right now, that is totally okay. I believe he's flipping through his slides. There, his contact information is on the screen for you guys. He is more than happy to help. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Chris, for another wonderful session. We look forward to seeing all of you guys next week. And if there's no other questions, I guess that wraps it up.
Thanks, Megan.
All right, so all of you guys, you have a good evening, and we'll see you next week, okay? That's it. Let's go ahead and